Are you key? So I'm returning to work on that piece that I was developing yesterday, which is Minerva's side of the story. What I'm working on right now to backtrack is I'm working on the script for my new piece, The Baskets, which I'm planning on taking to the Piggyback Fringe Festival in Wakefield, Quebec this summer. If you'd like to learn more about that project, please visit the link in the description of the video below. So what I'm working on right now is developing a little bit of the backstory. And so I've made a little bit of a draft that I need to record and see and hear how it works being said. Because what I've done is I've juxtaposed Minerva's account of the story with a version of Lee's, and Lee is the one that put the baskets into the museum. So where this story will take off from in the piece that I've already developed is when we first meet Lee and Helen Hover, and the first thing that Helen asks us is, what are your intentions? Because there had been all this controversy going on in the Sterrett branch of the family, they wanted to find out where we were coming from. So, we're there at the smoke cookhouse, and she asks us, why are you here? That she needs to find out where we're coming from. And they ended up referring us on to Minerva Sterrett, saying, you're not going to hear any nice things about us, but she knows about the family history. Minerva actually wrote an account of the family history, which the thesis of which is why the basket collection should have been split up amongst the family and be called the Young and Sandy Bar Bob collection. So what I've done is I've juxtaposed that account with part of Lee's account from the museum catalog of the basket collection. So the way Minerva starts off, it's interesting. She starts with the pioneer history. She says that in the 1850s, John Adam Perch and Tom Gray came to Orleans, California to mine. Young men in their 20s, they were partners. They started mining all the property around what is known now as Perch Creek and Cheenich Creeks. Perch did better than Gray, so they dissolved their partnership, Gray keeping a small portion of the property on Cheenich Flat. Perch realized logging and farming were more secure than mining, so he did all three. This property had been used for centuries by the Indians. The Indians' redneck and sawmill jack families were now living on the property. Gray started living with one of the redneck women, and Perch with Emma, who was living on the property. Living on the property that Perch wanted to mine. Perch built a big ranch house, planted an orchard, raised cattle, and had a pair of oxen for logging. Emma was a full-blooded Kuduk Indian. She and John began a family. Emma already had a little girl, Dolly, whose father Turner had a newspaper in Orleans when it was a county seat in the early mining days. Emma and John had 4 children, Eli, Elsie, Julia, Kate the youngest, and Kate the youngest died in her teens. Now Lee's account is a little bit different. It starts off with the Indian history as opposed to the pioneer history. Emma, a full-blooded Kuduk, was a basket maker. In fact, several of her baskets are in the collection. And at this point, I'm going to reveal or put up images of Emma's baskets on the web of clothesline that look like the start of a basket that's going to be above my head in production. So it was natural for Emma to collect baskets. Most of the people who made the baskets lived close by. People got together. Everyone knew everyone else on the river. Baskets were admired and exchanged or offered as gifts. Emma was born in 1838 and raised at Perch Creek. She married John Perch, an Englishman, in the late 1850s. Perch, born in 1827, was a gold miner who came to Orleans from England after several years in Ohio. The whole east side of what is now Orleans was ultimately owned by Perch. The Perches had 5 children, one of whom died in infancy. Their daughter Dolly married Ellen J. Nelson, a miner. Nelson Mine, above Ike's Falls near Soma's Bar, is named after Dolly's husband. Another story I think that Lee told us is that Nelson actually wanted to mine a Mikiaram, the sacred village. The village is there, and then there's the sacred dance ground nearby. He wanted to strip mine that all the way with one of those water cannons. And so what Dolly did was she went and she sat on a rock, one of the stone seats there on the dance ground. She sat there and she wouldn't let him mine. She told him, if you're going to mine this, you're going to have to mine me away with it. So he married her trying to get to the land, but the land is still there, so she won. Elsie married P.L. Young. Julia, Lee's grandmother, married Robert Sterrett. And Eli was the last Perch child. Now this is interesting because Minerva puts Eli up top, and we'll see why in a second. She goes on to say that when he was a young man, Eli became a partner with his father, married Nora Halverson, a miner's daughter, built a house on the ranch property. This property later deeded to Julia, but tricked by P.L. Young and Elsie, Julia's sister, into giving it to them. Eli could not get along with his father, so he was paid for his share, dissolved the partnership, and moved. Eli came later and wanted some of his mother's baskets, but Elsie, his sister, refused to give him any of Emma's baskets. Elsie said, "I'm caring for my mother, the baskets are mine." Eli and Elsie had a terrible disagreement over the baskets. After this happened, Eli and Elsie were never friendly. Eli felt the baskets were part of his heritage. Emma lived in her little cabin making baskets after John died. Her specialty were large trays. There will be the pictures hanging. Now the reason why I think it's interesting that Minerva puts Eli up front makes it look like he's the eldest born, the firstborn son, should, in a patriarchy, get all of the father's possessions. So read on. So Lee, he talks about the accumulation of the baskets, of the beginning of the basket collection by Elsie and P.L. P.L. found the baskets made by the women along the Klamath River to be truly exquisite. He and Elsie selected the very best in the area to collect. It is most likely that P.L. and Elsie did not pay money for the baskets they collected. Bartering was very common, and the Youngs probably added baskets to their collection in exchange for debts, food, or simply as gifts. Eventually, the Youngs, including their son Lawrence, inherited the Perch family home, and with it, most of the baskets and dance regalia collection. The other children were not being slighted. The collection was simply spread out among other Perch household possessions. Seems like a direct response to Minerva's objections. Minerva goes on. She says that Elsie was frugal and a schemer. Elsie was friendly with the Sandy Bar people, so when Sandy Bar Bob died, she was able to get his Indian ceremonial regalia from the Sandy Bar people as a treasure, which otherwise would have been buried with Bob. This is a great part of the basket collection, and here we'll reveal or hang images of that dance regalia from the basket start. It's going to be above me. Minerva says that I always wondered why Aunt Elsie was so friendly with Sandy Bar Joe, Bob's son, until I found out about the baskets. Joe is such a nice little man, always smiling and happy. He worked on the ranch for Aunt Elsie. In December of 1932, I, Minerva, married one of Julia's sons. Percy, Pedro, or P.L. Young disapproved. He said Percy was a renegade. Of course, I didn't agree. I said to P.L., my father wouldn't tell me what to do or who to marry unless I asked him. So our relationship was a little bit strained. Then, in 1933, the Youngs had the resort and mine up for sale. Percy and I wanted to buy it and run the resort. Since P.L. didn't like Percy, they would not sell to us. My father would have given us $5,000 for a down payment. They were asking $25,000, but instead they sold to Roy McGaines for only $250 down, and the remaining to be paid out of the mining of the ranch. So the ranch house, cabins, barn, and all the other buildings went into the Klamath. I never forgave the Youngs for letting that beautiful place and all the land being mined away. Lee's side of the story. is that Elsie developed an interest in the family's collection of basketry and dance regalia. Oh, this is Elsie Hover, his mother. So I'm going to have to insert the lead into that. So Elsie Hover developed an interest in her family's collection of basketry and dance regalia at an early age, and learned as much as she could about it. A woman named Grace Nicholson used to spend quite a bit of time in Orleans, and she was impressed by Elsie's ability and her interest in learning. Nicholson not only encouraged Elsie to go to college, she decided to finance her education. A strong friendship developed between the Youngs and Nicholson, and the Youngs helped Nicholson to develop an impressive collection of baskets. Elsie graduated from Humboldt State University in 1925 and spent 32 years teaching 1st through 8th grades in local schools. She is certainly remembered for her great commitment to the idea of transmitting Indian culture to the young people of Humboldt County. The Youngs decided to leave their collection in Elsie's hands, and the Sterretts passed their collection on to her as well. Elsie would put on marvelous programs in which she would utilize the exquisite family basketry. One of the reasons we are glad to have the collection housed in the museum is to honor Mother's commitment to its use as a teaching tool. But Minerva's interpretation of events is a little bit different. Elsie Hover wanted to display the baskets, she said. Her mother, Julia, let her take her baskets, and she had some I'd sent her from Alaska, so the collection became larger. We thought it would be an education for others to see the collection, so Elsie kept them on display in her home and made some demonstrations in Eureka. By this time, Elsie began to think the baskets belonged to her alone. Time passed. We were living our lives, not thinking too much about the baskets. Elsie Hover had retired from teaching and was not well. She said something about selling the baskets, but I reminded her they were not hers to sell according to Aunt Elsie Young's wishes. A young man in Eureka was trying to buy the baskets and had come to visit Elsie often. Elsie had been in the hospital several times and in a nursing home in Eureka. She wasn't herself and must have told him he could buy the baskets. Then Elsie died of a stroke on March 28, 1973. Her husband, Paul, had a stroke the same day and died at 12 that night. We had a double funeral. The young man called the next day and said Elsie said he could buy the baskets from her husband after she had died. I answered the phone and said the baskets were not for sale. Things had changed. Percy and I talked to Lee Hover after the funeral and said we would come down later and decide what to do about the baskets. When we went to Lee and Helen Hover's home at Bayside to discuss the baskets, they would not open the door. Lee and Helen did as they pleased about the baskets. Possession of them was 9/10 the law. Percy and I didn't think it was worth going to court over the baskets since we had already had many unpleasant experiences with Lee and Helen Hover over the Sterrett home place at Orleans where we were living in the 70s after our retirement. Leanna Sims Peterson of Eureka wrote me that the young man I mentioned before went to the Lee Hover home about the baskets, and Lee's son physically put him off the place and damaged his car. Leona couldn't understand why they would do such a thing. In conclusion, the Lee Hovers were only interested in the money they could make and in having their name on the collection. The collection should have been called the Elsie Young and Sandy Bar Bob collection, certainly not the Hover collection. It has made me doubt everything I read in history and take it with a grain of salt. I am glad the Clark Memorial Museum had the collection, and it will be properly cared for so that generations will be able to enjoy and appreciate the beautiful handwork of the Cuttock Indians of the Klamath River. I'm sad and disappointed that Aunt Elsie's wishes were not carried out, and her relatives have a small part of her basket collection to appreciate and hand down to future generations. The collection was not named for Aunt Elsie Young and Sandy Bar Bob, who collected the baskets. But maybe that's as it should be. Things never seem to turn out how you hope. Good. So it seems like I'm getting a little bit of a character out of Minerva's writing, which is good. have to work on the Lee speeches, and I'm also going to have to work on the narrator voice. Should it be? Or should I play both parts and make it clear through my actions who I am? Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about this project or fund it, please click on the link down in the description. Thanks for watching. Yo to.